It may sound excessive, but in a sense, we died that day because everything that was true the day before changed overnight.
50 years ago, Phnom Penh fell to the Khmer Rouge after years of civil war. Their primary target, people living in cities and intellectuals. In just 4 years, some 600,000 Cambodians fled the genocide that left up to 2 million dead.
We could smell a very bad odor. It was the dead bodies.
As many as 20,000 people could have been slaughtered in this area by Pol Pot's killing squads. So far,
Tens of thousands of survivors found refuge in a former colonial power where they had to start all over.
When they arrived in France, they had a second chance. They tried to rebuild their lives. Some succeeded, others didn't.
Half a century later, what remains of the memories of those who are no longer here and of those who survived?
We can see colorful landscapes, but if you look at them a bit longer, sometimes, often even, you can find bullet holes in tree trunks, things that seem innocuous at first glance.
Sarah is an artist who was living in Phnom Penh when the capital fell under the control of the Khmer Rouge.
Life ended for the first time on April 17, 1975. We didn't know it that day, but we were all dead. Or we should have been.
This 13-year-old boy smoking his first cigarette is him.
On the morning of April 17th, there was a lot of noise and shouting outside, people fighting. So I went out to see what was happening. At that moment, the Khmer Rouge appeared. One of them, as young as me, came up to me, and the first thing he said was, "What are you doing here? You're not a pure Khmer. Take your things and go to the countryside." And with that, I ran to my father to tell him what he had said, and his first reaction was to slap me. I didn't understand that it was ultimately an act of desperation on my father's part. It took me 30 years to come to terms with that.
Like more than 1,500 other people trying to escape the forced exodus to the countryside, Sarah and his family took shelter at the French embassy. But in May of 1975, the diplomatic compound was forced to close its doors, leaving the hundreds of Cambodians who had sought refuge there with no protection. Sarah's father did not have French nationality and was taken away by the Khmer Rouge despite having a diplomatic passport. His family never saw him again.
Everything that had been true the day before had changed overnight. In terms of the values of society, our place in society, we were nothing, so we had to rebuild everything. It was as if we were dead and needed the strength to rise again after this page of history.
The young boy, his mother, his brother, and his sister were expelled by Pol Pot's soldiers to Thailand. The family arrived in France a few days later.
France, for me, above all, was comic books. It was a whole world of images, and so it was a thing of magic in a way. But at the same time, it very quickly became a struggle, because we were taught that our ancestors were Gauls. At that point, I didn't understand, because I looked around me and didn't see any Gauls. But thanks to comics, I had a vague understanding. Asterix and Obelix actually helped me out of that personal crisis. Comics allowed me to have an anchor in relation to these things, so it saved me in a way from a certain form of madness.
30 minutes from Paris, Logne is considered France's leading Asian city. 40% of its residents are originally from Southeast Asia, a diaspora that formed in the 1970s and 80s. Just across the street from a monument dedicated to the victims of the two world wars, this small crowd came to witness the placings of the first pilings of a new memorial focused on another tragedy.
I should remind you that between 1.5 and 2 million people in Cambodia were killed. They were murdered, starved, and tortured. Imagine the scale. If that was France, it would be like wiping 14 million of our fellow citizens off the map in the space of 5 or 6 years.
The memorial aims to pay tribute to the lives lost, but also to the survivors of the genocide. Sun Lei, founder of the Fragmentus Project, has a warning for his French compatriots.
Phnom Penh was one of the most developed cities in Southeast Asia. And in a few months, even a few days, everything changed. We are never safe from a society sliding into oblivion.
He wants to create a dialogue between generations to preserve both individual and collective memories.
Our parents' journey should inspire us. I always say that memory is the cure for the ills of the present.
For Virak Thun, such memories had slipped away. After a long time, he realized the importance of reclaiming and preserving them.
My name is Virak Thun. I'm 49 years old. I'm French of Cambodian origin, the son of Khmer refugees, and my dual culture is really important. I have a large family. The eldest, Rashana, was born in Cambodia. So were Akara and Vatana. So 3 siblings were born in Cambodia. I was born in a refugee camp in Surin, Thailand, and in France, Pierre and Tida were born in Célestat, Alsace. To tell you the truth, I never really discussed it with my parents. I don't have any clear memories of the refugee camps. I have photos because we managed to find 2 snapshots from that time, but actually I can't remember it. My first childhood memories are of Alsace. From about 1979 to 84, we lived in a small village called Diefenthal, an incredible village of 150 or 200 residents at the time. And when we moved to Villeneuve-la-Garenne, the first thing my friends at the time asked was, "Where are you from?" So automatically I'd reply, "Well, I'm from Diefenthal." And they'd reply, "What do you mean you're from Diefenthal?" And they just kept insisting. That's when I realized that what they really wanted to know wasn't whether I was from Diefenthal or whether I was Alsatian. It was where I came from, and that's when I realized that I was Cambodian. There's no clear, precise moment when I said, "Come on, let's sit around the table and talk about what happened in Cambodia." I asked one of my aunts a silly question. I asked her, "Why have you never talked to your children about it?" She simply said, "They never asked." I lost my father in 2017. I had this man by my side for 40 years and always put things off. When I heard his eulogy, I realized that there were many things I didn't know about his life that I learned that day.
To avoid missing out on a chapter in their family's history, some adult children of survivors are trying to break the code of silence between the generations. Laura regularly questions her mother, Sambo, and her uncle, Daravang, about the war they survived.
Do you have any photos of the country when you were younger?
No, we couldn't keep them.
No. We didn't dare because it could cost us our lives. Anyone who didn't like people who live in cities could have used it against us. And we would have been done for.
When did you realize that it was the beginning of the Pol Pot regime and that it was going to be difficult?
A few weeks after they arrived, when they chased us out into the countryside.
The first trip was out of Pailin province. We were already starting to feel a little scared. And we were worried because from the main road, from a distance, we could smell a very bad odor. It was the dead bodies.
I was 12 years old when we left home to work in the fields, under the Khmer Rouge. There was no more school. We didn't go to the pagoda anymore. We immediately understood that we were at war.
Sambo and her family survived forced labor in the fields.
That's my older sister, the third one.
In 1979, they passed through several refugee camps in Thailand before arriving in France. Despite all the hardships they endured, exile would prove to be one of the most difficult.
First of all, I didn't know how to speak French, so it was complicated. The social worker initially found me a job as a cleaner.
Sambo's dream to study to become a nurse was crushed. It would take her more than 15 years to feel comfortable in her host country and to feel proud.
It happened when I moved into this house. I said to myself, I've managed to have a roof over my head for my family.
We weren't aware that we had suffered a trauma. No one talked to us about that. When we arrived in France at the airport, the only thing I remember was being given a blanket that I had over my shoulders. That's it. It was like, welcome, and deal with it. Back then, it's not as if they were psychologists waiting for us. So we were left to our own devices, and it was a long journey for us to rebuild our lives.
They lost family members, they were injured. They had to face extremely atrocious things. I don't even dare to imagine. And when they arrived in France, they had a second chance. They tried to rebuild their lives. Telling their story is supposed to help. But if parents don't talk about it and children don't ask about it, how can we heal?
But is it even possible to heal from such a legacy of suffering? Half a century later, there's hope that shared memory can help soothe the wounds left behind by genocide and exile.